okay, I wouldn't have a problem with Death Battle if they portrayed themselves as just making fan animation fight stuff. Because, fan fiction stuff can just be for fun, but they try to do this pseudo intellectual, like they prove stuff. Like they try to treat it like it's almost a pseudo canonical kind of thing. Whereas it could have been fine if they just wanted to do fights. And one of the big problems is, okay, there's two issues that are sort of a simple thing to describe a lot of the problems I have. One of them is that they'll selectively use certain versions of certain characters and claim that they use the strongest versions, quote unquote, of those characters. And then they'll cherry pick individual traits and they'll give powers to certain characters that they don't have because maybe other similar characters use them. They use a whole lot of nonsense reasoning anyways in the first place. And I'm not gonna, this is sort of an example of them doing that, and I'm not going to argue, who should have won whatever fight. I don't really care. I partly want to point out how they selectively pick certain versions of characters. So when you look at the whole Ben 10 versus Green Lantern thing, I don't want to argue who should have won or not because who cares? If it's too stupid and vague to go versus Green Lantern, as if there aren't tons of different Green Lanterns. And it does make somewhat of a difference which Green Lantern. And if we're just talking about Hal Jordan and the canonical version of Hal Jordan, and specifically times that he was using Green Lantern powers, there's been comics run on long enough, they'll take a superhero and make some version of them what if they had infinite power. They've done that with Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman in different story arcs, for example. And there are versions of Hal that are like that. And it's stupid. And I'll admit, all of this stuff is stupid, but they just sort of ignore this. So the obvious one, one of them for Hal is Parallax, where he effectively had the full power of the Green Lantern power battery, the full power of the Green Lantern Corps in a sense, absorbed inside his body. And it theoretically makes him have this sort of infinite potential. And so there was sort of what beats him is he's being crazy, and they retconned this, that he was being influenced by this being of fear and being driven insane by it. That's known as Parallax. And he was probably, like, he probably wanted to be beaten, and it made him vulnerable enough to eventually possibly lose. And we sort of know how capable someone can be with, like, the full absorbed powers of the Green Lantern Corps, because after that storyline, they did a storyline with Kyle Rayner where he absorbed all the power that Hal Jordan had as Parallax, and he basically became this, like, infinitely capable, beyond multiversal whatever kind of character, where he could do things like manipulate time in ways that you would think would cause a paradox, because he could they describe it as him being able to hold all the threads of time, so he could do things seemingly contradictory and altering reality. And he was, like, omnipresent, omnipotent, like all kinds of stupid BS. And, this is another character with Green Lantern powers who is a stronger version than the inaccurate portrayal of Hal Jordan that they use. But, like, they ignore both of these characters. Also around the same time was another storyline that's the Dark Side War, where Hal Jordan gets this Green Lantern infused mother box, and he becomes this kind of abstract god of light kind of a character. So he's not like a living being anymore, in a sense, and he's, like, freely manipulating things with ease. I'm pretty sure there's, like, this all-out attack. He does it because there's, like, this all-out attack against Oa, and he just wills that it stops, basically, and it stops. And he does things like he kind of thinks about the trauma that he had when he was younger and how he could unkill his father and stuff. And he travels back in time and talks with different versions of himself when he was younger, in, like, ridiculous things like that. And he just does that at will with zero effort. And this is arguably the strongest version of Hal Jordan that's ever been in any comics, where he wouldn't be subject to anything in the universe per se, and he just effortlessly manipulates the universe. The problem with characters like this, like, I'm gonna get into it. There's obvious issues with characters like this, but this was still, like, this is 2015, and that's still before this video came out. Like, this video came out around 2018, I believe. So it was years before that video came out. So they should have at least known, like, this is a infinitely powerful Hal Jordan. So if they knew anything about comics, they could have brought this up because they wanted Hal Jordan to win, apparently. Like, this would have been a better excuse for Hal Jordan to win. So if we go to characters who've achieved certain powers with the Green Lantern ring, technically White Lantern Kyle Rayner, like, his ring is a Green Lantern ring that can focus all the other aspects of the emotional spectrum. And like, one of the characteristics of White Lanterns is basically an immunity to death. And I mean, it's a character using powers like that with a Green Lantern ring. And I understand why some people would say this wouldn't count, and I'm fine with that. But I already gave examples of like characters with Green Lantern powers who were effectively infinite, and it's stupid. And so Hal Jordan at a time too had White Lantern powers. So there is a White Lantern version of Hal Jordan. So if we're talking about like the strongest version of Hal Jordan, like there is also a Black Lantern version of Hal Jordan. But if we're talking about like the strongest version of Hal Jordan, there's been several versions of the character that aren't what if versions of the character that effectively had infinite power, and it's stupid comic stuff. But then we have this problem where you have like a version of Ben 10 that's the Alien X version of Ben 10, and then you have versions of Hal Jordan that are like infinite power versions of Hal Jordan. And it's like stuff like that devolves into an argument of my character is infinity powerful, so he should win. And then someone responds, no, my character is infinity +1, so he should win. So when you have these infinitely powered characters, one of the issues you have is their abilities are, in a sense, undefinable. And there's usually no stories that relate to what they're actually capable of. And it turns into sort of idiotic, childish arguing. And so that's one of the issues I even have with this Kuro video. If I remember correctly, he doesn't get into the fact that there's versions of Hal Jordan, or that there's been versions of Green Lanterns that are infinitely powerful, and it's stupid. Like, there shouldn't be these conversations about infinitely powered characters fighting each other. Because there's no way to, like, you can't make an argument.